Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to yet another interesting episode of Surfing the Anterior segment, a Young Ophthalmologist Society Initiative, Session 6. On behalf of the team of Surfing, I wish all of you a very happy Dashera and Durga Puja. I'm Dr. Gunjan. I'll be a moderator today, and with me, Dr. Akshay Nair will be co-moderating the session. We have a session of ocular surface squamous neoplasms today. So we have an eminent list of panelists today. With us is today Dr. Swati Singh, who is currently the clinical research ophthalmologist at Center for Ocular Regeneration at LV Prasad Eye Institute. She has completed her fellowship in ophthalmic plastic surgery, orbit, and ocular oncology from LVPI. And further, she went ahead with Professor Selve at Royal Adelaide Hospital, Australia. Another panelist is Dr. Anasuya Kapoor. She's currently heading the Ocular Oncology and Ophthalmic Plastic Surgery Services at El Prasad Eye Institute, Vijayawada. She has also completed her fellowship in Ophthalmic Plastic Surgery, Orbit, and Ocular Oncology from LVPI. Dr. Nupur Goyal is practicing as a cataract and oculoplasty surgeon in Mumbai. She also holds a long-term fellowship in comprehensive and oculoplasty from LV Prasad Eye Institute. I'll like to introduce Dr. Akshay Nair. He'll be the co-moderator today. He is a consultant in oculoplastic and ocular oncology at Tijod Eye Hospital in Mumbai. He has completed his residency training at Shankar Netralaya, and then he completed his fellowship at LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad. And then he went ahead overseas to complete his training at New York Eye and Ear Infirmary of Mount Sinai, USA. Welcome, Dr. Akshay, and welcome to all the panelists. I hand over the session to Dr. Akshay from now on. Please, Dr. Akshay, take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Our speaker who will be presenting this very interesting case is Dr. Deepanjali Arya. She completed her postgraduate residency in ophthalmology from MAMC, Maulana Azad Medical College in Delhi. And following which she's completed a 2-year oculoplastic oncology fellowship at Dr. Shroff Charity Eye Hospital with Dr. Seema Das. And she's currently a senior resident at PGIMER in RML Hospital, New Delhi. And she'll be presenting a very interesting case to us. So without further ado, Dr. Deepanjali, can you, while we share your presentation, can you start? Dr. Gunjan, you will be sharing our slides.
Yeah.
A very good evening to everybody. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I audible? A very good evening to everybody, all the panelists, the moderators, and UC members watching tonight's session. I thank UC for giving me the opportunity to present in front of this expert panel today. Can I have my slides, please?
Yeah. Is it visible?
No, not yet.
Wait.
To me right now.
Okay.
Do you want to stop screen sharing and restart again?
Yeah. Is it getting shared?
I can see them now.
You can
yeah,
share?
now
see
it's coming.
I can see them.
Okay.
I can see them now. So, yeah, next slide.
Yeah.
So I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Seema Das, Head of Oculoplasty Oncology Services, and Dr. Arpan Gandhi, Head of Laboratory Services at Shroff Charity Eye Hospital, New Delhi, for giving me the opportunity to present this case and work on it. We have a 16-year-old male who presented to the OPD with chief complaints of a slowly growing, painless, progressive, non-pigmented opacity and a pigmented nodular opacity in the left eye noticed to the patient since past 2 months. He had been diagnosed as xeroderma pigmentosa at 2 years of age and had no prior medical, surgical, systemic, or treatment history. His younger sibling was also diagnosed with the same, and his parents had the history of consanguineous marriage. On gross external examination, there were hyperpigmented skin macules diffusely affecting the entire sun-exposed area of the body with no palpable regional lymphadenopathy noted. On ophthalmic examination, his best corrected visual acuity was 6/6 in both eye. The eyelid adnexa, extraocular movements, anterior chamber, IOP, pupil, lens, and fundus were all within normal limits. On slit lamp examination of the left eye, the eyelid, palpable conjunctiva, and the fornical conjunctiva was all within normal limit. The bulbar conjunctiva showed mild congestion and corneal scarring from 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock. A pearly white raised nodular keratinized lesion measuring 4 into 3 millimeter in size located at the temporal limbus with areas of pigmented conjunctiva around it was noted, which was fairly mobile. A 5 into 3 millimeter elevated dark brown pigmented lesion with no six spaces was also noted at inferonasal bulbar conjunctiva about 0.5 millimeter away from the limbus with surrounding flat conjunctival pigmentation. On slit lamp assessment of the right eye, we also noted a pearly white plaque-like lesion at temporal limbus measuring about 2 into 2 millimeter and areas of flat dark brown pigmented lesion in inferonasal and inferobulbar conjunctiva occupying approximately 4 flocars of area around the limbus. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide. So
Yeah.
an ASOCT scan.
Dr. Deepanjali, what we're going to do here for a second, if you can go back to the previous slide, Dr. Gunjan. Yeah, we are going to take a quick poll over here amongst our audience members who are here. And just on your screens, you can see a poll that has popped up. That's the question is, how often do you see a case of OSSN in your clinic? Each of us can choose one option. And in about 10 seconds, we'll be shutting the poll just to get an idea of the kind of experience that the audience here has. So only half of the viewers have polled, and we're stopping the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right. So here are the results of this poll. So most of us are seeing patients of OSSN between 3 to 6, one case in between 3 to 6 months. There are some who see more than a month, so it's good. Our next question in this poll is, when you see a case of OSSN, what is the plan? Do you A, treat it yourself, or B, refer it to a specialist? And we've got most answers in, and the results are that most of us are treating it themselves. So it's a very experienced or a well-tuned audience that we have here. And finally, before we go ahead, we have a quick question which is relevant to this particular case. Would you or do you request anterior segment OCT in all cases of cases of OSSN? Yes, in all cases. No, I have not done it before. Yes, only in some cases. Or D, I am not sure about the findings or the utility of ASOCT in OSSN. And yeah, I think we've got most of our answers in. Most of the audience is doing it in all cases, and some of them do it in some cases, and there are 17% who have not yet done it before. So this is just to get an idea of the current practice patterns for OSSN, and we can see that while there is still a significant portion of the audience who are doing ASOCT for OSSN, it's still not the common practice. So with that, can you proceed with Dr. Gunjan? If you go to the next slide, and Dr. Deepanjali, all can start. You can start with your presentation here.
All right. So we went ahead and did an ASOCT scan on the left eye through the two lesions. The non-pigmented lesions showed a raised hyperreflective thickened epithelium with abrupt transition between normal and thickened abnormal epithelium with central backshadowing, which corresponded to the white nodular keratinized lesion in the central area. The ASOCT of the left eye in the pigmented lesion showed hyperreflective thickened epithelium with backshadowing corresponding to the pigmented lesion with no intrinsic cystic spaces. Next slide. We did an ASOCT scan on the right eye through the suspicious lesion. which showed some areas of hyperreflective thickened epithelium in the area which was corresponding to the suspicious non-pigmented lesion, and also areas of hyperreflective thickened epithelium with some backshadowing corresponding to the adjoining pigmented lesions. So a clinical diagnosis of xeroderma pigmentosa with right eye OSSN and primary acquired melanosis and left eye OSSN with conjunctival melanoma was made, and the patient was planned for wide excision biopsy with 4 margin and double freeze thaw cryotherapy and localized alcohol assisted keratoepitheliectomy and amniotic membrane graft. Next slide. On histopathological evaluation, the right eye non-pigmented lesion showed stratified squamous epithelium with mild to moderate dysplasia, and the right eye pigmented nasal lesion showed primary acquired melanosis grade 2 with grade 2 atypia. The left eye non-pigmented nodule showed moderate squamous dysplasia, and the pigmented nasal nodule showed grade 5 atypia with melanoma in situ. All the tumor margins, including the base and corneal margins, were tumor-free. On second week follow-up post-op visit of the patient, a 1 into 1 millimeter gelatinous non-pigmented nodule was noted at the edge of the previously excised conjunctival OSSN. We did an ASOCT scan through this lesion, which revealed a hyperreflective thickened epithelium with abrupt transition, which was suggestive of a recurrence of OSSN. So we started the patient on topical interferon 1 alpha 2 beta eye drops 4 times daily, and patient were called up after 2 weeks. On his subsequent follow-up visits with the treatment, after 4 months of treatment, the patient was completely there was no regression. There was no regression. There was complete regression of the recurrent OSSN noted, and the ocular surface was stable after 1 year of follow-up. There was minimal conjunctival scarring and inferior corneal scar in the left eye. No further recurrence of OSSN or conjunctival melanoma was noted in the last follow-up visits of the patient. These are the final photographs of both the eyes, right and left. So to conclude, to summarize, we had a young male patient with xeroderma pigmentosa with right eye OSSN and primary acquired melanosis, and left eye OSSN with conjunctival melanoma in situ, who had a recurrence after surgery, which was managed well on topical therapy. The further plan of the management of the patient included sun protective measures and genetic counseling in view of XP and regular ophthalmic and systemic evaluations. So an early detection of ocular surface tumors is a key to a proper diagnosis, which should include a detailed slit lamp evaluation of ocular surface, including the eyelid, lid margin, the bulbar and palpebral conjunctiva and cornea, and always assess the lymph nodes. A prompt biopsy of any suspicious lesion is required to prevent morbidity. Pigmented conjunctival lesions should also be biopsied to rule out conjunctival melanoma, even a pigmented OSSN, and a precursor lesion. Ocular surface squamous neoplasia is mostly a clinical diagnosis with risk factors known such as sun exposure, smoking, HIV, and immunodeficiency. In suspicious lesions or complex cases, ASOCT can frequently act as optical biopsy and help the diagnosis. ASOCT is also useful in assessing patients which are on treatment. Histopathology remains a gold standard. Various treatment options, depending upon the type of presentation that are prescribed, depending upon the presentation which is localized, systemic, segmental, diffuse, corneal, intraocular, or orbital. OSSN usually presents as unilateral vascularized gelatinous limbal mass with intrinsic vascularity of feeder vessel and keratin. This is located in the sun-exposed interpalpebral fissure medially or laterally. However, it is known to be present in various presentations with a wide spectrum of presentation which can masquerade as infective and inflammatory etiologies. A typical ASOCT through the OSSN lesion shows hyperreflective thickened epithelium with abrupt transition between normal and abnormal epithelium and a shadow effect. Time domain ASOCT has also shown hyperreflective basal
Dr.
layout
Deepanjali, I don't think
suggesting
we are
tumor
seeing the
associated.
images corresponding to what you're saying.
Uh, yes, this one.
All right.
So I'm describing this image where a typical OSOCT, are we on that image? Can we see that?
Yes.
So, yes. So a typical ASOCT feature suggestive of OSSN show hyperreflective thickened epithelium with abrupt transition between normal and abnormal epithelium and a shadow effect. Time domain OCTs have also shown hyperreflective basal layer subjacent to or associated with a clear plane of separation between OSSN. Next slide. Management options include non-surgical therapies, including topical chemotherapy, topical or injectable immunotherapy, and surgical resection. So with this, I would like to conclude by taking the opportunity to put forward few questions to the esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Deepa. That was a very interesting case. Dr. Gunjan, if you can go back to the slit lamp photos pre-operatively. Yeah. So here on the right eye, the diagnosis was an OSSN with possibly primary acquired melanosis, right?
Yes.
And in the left eye, it was conjunctival melanoma and an OSSN. So typically,
Yes.
primary acquired melanosis by itself is not known to be associated with xeroderma pigmentosum. And because there is the inability of the DNA to repair itself, which is the crux of the issue in XP, the three malignancies that are
Right.
known to occur are basal, squamous cell, and melanoma. So while technically what you see clinically is PAM, it probably is already a melanoma that is happening. Whereas in non-XP patients, typically we see PAM that evolves to have atypia that involves degrees of atypia and then goes into complete full. It is a precursor to melanoma. So which is why in this case it probably was melanoma in any case and not PAM. But it's great to get such a great wonderful spectrum over here. So if you can stop screen sharing, I'm just going to share one image just to get a quick poll to know what. So here is an image that you see. It's a collage of the primary view, down gaze, up gaze, right gaze, left gaze. You can see a gelatinous mass extending from the medial canthus all the way onto the inferior 6 to 8 hour clock hours up to the fornix. So given that now you've seen this photograph, my question to most of y'all is, to the audience is, what would you do in this case? Would it be large excision with cryo with amniotic membrane graft, plaque brachytherapy, topical mitomycin C therapy, enucleation, exenteration, systemic chemotherapy followed by surgery, or not sure of what to do? Right, we've got almost all the people put in their poll. So we stop now and I'll share the report, the result. It's interesting. While most 4 out of majority of them think interferon, there is a splay of the preferred choice, with some preferring large excision, some preferring plaque brachytherapy, mitomycin C, and even systemic chemotherapy followed by surgery. So it really shows that I don't think there's that much of a complete consensus on what we would do for such large lesions. So while we'll take those questions in a bit, what I'm going to do is quickly share the surgical options or some pearls in surgical excision. So I'm going to talk about this case, which is a very typical whitish lesion that was seen in a patient, gradually increasing in size. If you see, there is intrinsic vascularity and all the points that Dr. Deepanjali covered. On rose Bengal, you can see there is, that the mottled speckled staining. There is a corneal component and there are feeder vessels. And OSSN basically covers everything from conjunctival intraepithelial neoplasia to full-blown squamous cell carcinoma. And like we've discussed, there are multiple management options: surgery, chemotherapy, immunotherapy. When do you prefer straight excision? When there is a conjunctival and or corneal component with no pharyngeal involvement. In this case, you do the wide excision with a no-touch technique. The corneal component is treated with localized alcohol keratoepitheliectomy, that the way this case was managed, followed by double freeze cryotherapy to double freeze thaw cryotherapy to the margins, and then glue with amniotic membrane over the defect. Surgery in cases of aggressive or large can be treated still with large excision and mucous membrane graft if it has intraocular extension, there is extended enucleation, if there is orbital involvement, exenteration is an option. But now we are pushing the boundaries and combining different therapy modes. We are doing immunomodulation, debulking the tumor, reducing the size, and then going and doing an excision. We are able to do systemic chemotherapy, reduce the bulk, the mass of the tumor, and then go in for slightly less radical surgery. Plaque brachytherapy is also now being used, especially in recurrent tumors. And now wide excision, and to combat the loss of limbal stem cell that would be there, you're combining it with a simple limbal stem cell transplant in this. So there are now multiple options available. But while we do that, we come to the focus here, which is going to be surgical excision. For recurrent cases or as an adjuvant case, in a localized case, chemotherapy is an option, especially for corneal lesions alone. And immunotherapy is something that I'm going to let Dr. Anusuya talk about. So coming back to this case, I'm just... So the first thing that we do is use a bipolar cautery to mark 4 millimeters of margin of healthy conjunctiva all around the tumor. And once this is done, you've marked out the clear edges of the tumor. You are going to lift it, and with a monopolar radiofrequency cautery, dissect the base of the tumor. This involves removing the conjunctiva and the tenons till you're able to see bare sclera underneath, up till the limbus. Once that is done, to take care of the corneal component, you're applying alcohol, which loosens the epithelium over there. Again, with a margin of 3-4 millimeters, you are going to scrape and lift up the devitalized, thinned, disintegrated epithelium, such that a scroll of the epithelial layers comes up to the limbus. Once this is done, either in a dry technique or in a wet technique, now you can see that at no point is any of the instrument, the crescent blade or the forceps, directly holding the tumor. And this is exactly the no-touch technique. Once this is done, the sets of instruments that come in are different. Base cautery to cauterize any feeder vessels, double freeze thaw cryotherapy, which is rapid cryotherapy, and a slow thawing, where you do not want to apply saline on the ice ball to hasten up the thawing. I prefer to do cryotherapy to the base as well. This takes care of the fact that in case there may be a full thickness base involvement, then you've already bought some insurance in the way of base cryotherapy. The entire defect is then covered with fibrin glue. Here you're putting the two components of it, and then an amniotic membrane graft is spread all over. The excess AMG is then trimmed all around, and that's how we do it. So this is, of course, the histopathology, which clearly shows OSSN, squamous cell carcinoma. So my pearls for surgical excision would be, first, choice of the choice of case is important. You need to know which cases are amenable to surgery. If it's a localized small tumor in an 85-year-old patient who's not amenable to follow-ups, you do not want to give interferon and call them back every month. You would rather excise and make the patient tumor-free at that point. And remember, it's not one or the other. It's not surgery or immunotherapy, immunomodulation, or uh, chemotherapy. You can combine both. If you feel you're able to, if you feel you're able to do immunomodulation and then go in and excise later on, you can do that. Margins are important. You need to go in and excise the margins. Once you do the margins, you need to inform and communicate with your pathologist how you oriented the tumor or where it was positioned in the eye. And if you're unsure, take a separate margin. And just give me 1 second. We have a couple of people waiting in the waiting room to get admitted. Right. So if you're unsure, you need to take fresh margins and send to the pathologist and let them know what you're dealing with. In double freeze thaw cryotherapy, one of the quick mistakes that some beginners do is they don't allow the ice ball to form completely, and then the assistant pours some saline over the ice ball in an attempt to quickly cause the thawing process. The crux of the issue is the slow thawing that happens. That is what is killing the possible tumor cells at the margin. No saline has to be put in. Additionally, cryo the base. It's just one additional step. And finally, make sure the defect is completely sealed with amniotic membrane, such that the next morning you don't want a shifted membrane with which is over, and you need to reposition that and take the patient up. So make sure that the glue is dried up completely and the amniotic membrane is in place. Follow up. Always treat as per histopathology. If the margins are positive, think of what you're going to do. If the base is positive, you may have to think of what you have to do. And so don't treat it as per histopathology. Follow-up has to be very close, and your treatment plan depends on the pathology. So those are my pearls for surgical excision. And I'm going to stop sharing here. So what we're going to do now is have our panelists turn on their video so we can see them. Dr. Anusuya, Dr. Nupur, and Dr. Swati Singh.
Yeah, very well summarized, Akshay. Yeah. So the only thing is crucial here is to send your specimens on a filter paper. So mostly in outside practice, we see they'll send it in a vial of formalin filled tissue, and the pathologist will just say it's a diagnosis rather than writing if it's not an ophthalmic trained pathologist, rather than writing on the margins and the base. So it's always nice that you take a filter paper, place your tissue, let it dry, and then transfer formalin. It will stay on that surface. It will not get displaced. And for margins, you can send separate labeled tissue on tissue paper, separate labeled superior, nasal, temporal in a separate vial, so that your pathologist can clearly comment on the intent of the base or the margins. And rest very well presented, Deepanjali. I think Dr. Anusuya can add her expertise.
Yes, so excellent case, Deepanjali. Like it had all the important points which we should remember in treating conjunctival tumors in a case of xeroderma pigmentosa. So few points I want to highlight there was that it was a child, a 16-year-old child. So that is what happens in xeroderma pigmentosa. Compared to other cases, in xeroderma cases, we see that it is in the first 2 decades, most of the patients, 50% patients present with ocular surface tumors, and as Akshay said, conjunctival melanoma and OSSNs are the most common ones we see. And second thing which Panjali mentioned there was that there was history of consanguinity, which is also there in 30% of cases of xeroderma pigmentosa, as it is an autosomal recessive disorder. Then the other thing which was there was a bilateral case. Bilateral presentation is also common in xeroderma, and apart from OSSN, there was also PAM and conjunctival melanoma there. And the last point that I wanted to highlight there was the presence of recurrence. So the recurrence rate, when we, what Akshay just said, wide conjunctival excision biopsy along with cryotherapy and alcohol keratopetelectomy, what we do, the recurrence rate reported in literature is around 12%. But what happens in the xeroderma patient, the rates are as high as 65%. So that is what happened in this patient as well. So it was a excellent case, very well managed, Dipanjali.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right, Dr. Anusuya, can we, if you can start sharing your screen, we'll have your
Okay.
perspective on interferon immunotherapy, because now more than surgery, it seems to have replaced, become the gold standard for primary, small, localized, or large, extensive OSSNs. Keeping in mind that we are just limiting ourselves to only non-invasive OSSNs with immunotherapy. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Akshay. So, hello everyone. I will be talking on immunotherapy in OSSN, my top 10 pearls in the next few minutes. So, having already understood that ocular surface squamous neoplasias are usually present as limbal nodules in the interpalpebral area with intrinsic vascularity, feeder vessels, and surface keratin. Let us now understand the 10 key aspects of immunotherapy in OSSN. As Akshay rightly said, that interferon has become a game changer in management of OSSN. And so the first description of topical interferon in OSSN was given by Muskin in the year 1994, where he extrapolated the use of intralesional interferon in skin squamous cell carcinomas to eye, and he had a good result, as you can see here. So the first thing about interferon is it is a pleiotropic glycoprotein produced by leukocytes, and it has a range of action against OSSN. So it has anti-proliferative, antiviral, cytotoxic, anti-angiogenic, and immunomodulatory effects. Next, the use of interferon in OSSN is of three types: immunoreduction, immunotherapy, and immunoprevention. And I will take you through each of them now. So by the term immunoreduction, mean interferon will reduce the size of the tumor so that surgical excision is facilitated. Like in this particular tumor, where there is an extensive diffuse OSSN on the ocular surface, which was misdiagnosed conjunctivitis and being treated for the past 6 months. So in similar cases, where the basal diameter is more than 15 millimeter, or there is more than 6 cloacas of limbal involvement, or what we call as giant OSSNs. So there we can reduce the size of the tumor and then do surgical excision. Immunotherapy, where interferon is the sole treatment for the tumor, like most commonly for the corneal OSSNs. Like in this case, you can see it is appearing as an opaque sheet of cells on the cornea, and with the interferon, it has completely regressed. For smaller conjunctival or conjunctivocorneal OSSNs, immunotherapy can also be used, and in recurrent tumor post-surgical excision. The third use of OSSN will be immunoprevention. That means to prevent tumor recurrence. This is when the histopathology report suggests that there is a margin positivity with tumor cells, that we give interferon therapy to the patient for next 3 months. Now moving on to the third pearl, what is the dosage to use in these cases? So different centers use different doses, starting from 1 million international unit to 5 million international unit. So what I am telling now is the dosage we use at our institute. So for only corneal OSSNs, we use topical interferon alpha 2b at a dose of 1 million international unit per ml. And in cases where there is a conjunctival component, we top up the topical interferon along with the subconjunctival monthly injection dose of 5 million international unit per ml. So the topical dosage is 1 million international unit per ml, 1 drop 4 times daily, as was used in the case shown by Deepika. And it is continued till 3 months beyond the clinical tumor regression. And subconjunctival injection is 5 million international unit per ml. The entire prefilled syringe is injected subconjunctivally. So the advantage of injection over drops is ensured compliance, quicker resolution, no compounding is required, and insurance coverage is there. So with this, I will like to show you this short video on how to prepare interferon eye drops. So this is the pre-filled syringe. It comes in 2 doses, 3 and 5 million international unit per ml. I am using the 5 million international unit per ml here. Then I am taking distilled water, and the entire process is being done under strict aseptic protocol. This is 4 ml of distilled water going into the vial. So then it is labeled nicely along with the date, because beyond 1 month we can't use this. And then this vials are dispensed in thermocol box, placing ice packs inside, because the maintenance of the cold chain is of utmost importance whenever we are treating our patients with interferon, topical interferon therapy. So we will have to ask the patient to store the interferon vials in the door of the fridge at 4 to 8 degree Celsius temperature. Next, moving on to the injection technique for OSSN, interferon injection in OSSN. So this is one case. So parakin topically instilled. Then you will have to select an area outside the tumor where there is no blood vessel, and you will also have to be careful not to double puncture the conjunctiva. And then you inject the entire pre-filled syringe, 1 ml. So this nice ballooning will happen. So it is basically we are injecting in the subconjunctival space and not through the lesion. So moving on to the 6th pearl, in the West, interferon therapy is very costly, but that is thankfully that is not the case for us. We get each 1 cc syringe of interferon at cost of 811 rupees. So the average cost of around 6 cycles of topical interferon therapy comes to around 9,732, along with the perilesional injection cost being 811 for each injection. So moving on to the side effects, interferon is extremely well tolerated in our patients. We hardly see any side effect in our patients, but there can be mild irritation and stinging sensation, some conjunctival hyperemia, and rarely follicular conjunctivitis, superficial punctate keratitis, or punctal stenosis. And systemic side effects like flu-like symptoms, fever, myalgia can happen with the injections. Moving on to the 8th pearl, so regular meticulous follow-up is extremely important in patients being treated with interferon. So as Akshay rightly said, at the beginning, at the time of initiating therapy, we will have to have a good conversation with the patient, stressing on the need for long-term follow-up. So at our institute, the follow-up protocol is while on treatment every 4 weeks till there is clinical resolution of the tumor, and post-resolution it is 3 monthly in the first year, then 4 monthly in the second, 6 monthly in the third year, and yearly afterwards, at least for a duration of 5 years. So literature review shows that response rate of interferon ranges from 80 to 100%. Our own center data shows this to be around 95%. And the mean resolution time is around 4 months, and the recurrence rate is 8%. So this clinical photograph is showing a patient with diffuse OSSN completely regressed post-treatment with interferon. And finally, immunotherapy versus surgical excision. The advantages are that there is reduced risk of limbal stem cell deficiency and the aftermath, and the treatment of microscopic disease, which helps in reducing recurrence theoretically. But there are few challenges with interferon therapy, like what I showed you. It needs to be freshly prepared each time, and you can't use it beyond 1 month. And you need to refrigerate the topical eye drop, and the cold chain maintenance is important, otherwise it won't work. And multiple follow-up visits will be required, and for a long duration. So patient compliance is of utmost importance in interferon therapy. So the points to retain from my presentation: interferon is a glycoprotein with a wide spectrum of activity in OSSN. The indications for topical interferon alpha-2b therapy are immunotherapy in cases of mainly corneal OSSNs, immunoreduction in diffuse and giant OSSNs, and immunoprevention in cases where the margin is positive post-excision biopsy. The dosage can range anywhere from 1 million international unit to 5 million international unit, and the topical drops needs to be continued for a period of at least 3 months after complete tumor resolution clinically to deal with the microscopic residue. Meticulous long-term follow-up is of utmost importance. The advantages of medical therapy include ability to treat the entire ocular surface and the potential to avoid stem cell deficiency associated with extensive surgical excisions. The average time for clinical resolution ranges between 4 to 6 months. Thank you, everyone. So any queries, you can mail me at this ID. So any questions, I will be happy to take.
Dr. Anuswa, what's your take on the first time use of mitomycin C versus interferon, let's see in a case who has 3 to 4 clock-hours of OSSN?
Okay, thanks for the question, Swati. So mitomycin C, the response with mitomycin C as well as 5-fluorouracil, the response compared to interferon is much faster. But the problem with them, with mitomycin, is the ocular side effects, the amount of blepharoconjunctivitis which happens, the SPKs, punctal stenosis. So if the patient can come for multiple follow-ups and has a fridge at home and able to afford, I will prefer interferon to mitomycin C or 5-fluorouracil, considering the local side effects.
Yeah, so in case
no, go ahead. I was just saying that probably the only scenario where I would prefer mitomycin C or 5-FU over interferon is severely immunocompromised patients, or when you know that because at the end of the day it's an immunotherapy. It requires the body's immune system to be able to have that the effect on the tumor cells. So it's now there is now growing evidence to show that in immunocompromised patients like HIV positive patients, interferon does not have the expected effect that we see, and in those patients maybe then mitomycin C or 5-FU may have a better role. Dr. Nupur and Anusuya, what are your experiences with systemic chemotherapy topical drops in OSSN in immunocompromised patients?
So actually, for HIV positive patients, like a majority of the patients are HIV positives for OSS. Interferon works well. So there, the more than the immune reaction in the body, the major concern there is we know from our from the literature that these OSSNs in HIV, they have a significant component of the invasive squamous cell carcinoma. And these topical interferons, they work very well for the conjunctival intraepithelial neoplasia or the pre-invasive OSSNs. But for the invasive OSSNs, many a times we see that the patients have a residual, and when we excise that, that comes out as a invasive part. So for the invasive OSSNs, they don't work that well as it works for the conjunctival intraepithelial neoplasias. So the indication for mitomycin C for me will be where patient is refractory to interferons. We have seen they work MMC or 5-fluorouracil work. At times they work well for those patients refractory to interferon.
Can I just add a few points to so Anusua very nicely demonstrated the preparation and the injection of the interferon. The only thing is that what I saw that you were using the pre-prepared vials for dispensing drops. So probably in a private practice that may not be easily available. So what I do is I ask the patient to get 10 ml lubricating drops, empty out the the entire the lubricant, and then dispense the drops in that. Akshay, how you follow it in your practice? Like
absolutely the same technique. Lubricating drops. Open it, withdraw 1 cc, add 1 cc of the drops, and put it in a sterile. Put it in a thermocol box with ice packs and send it to the patient.
So you are diluting it with a lubricant, is it? Because I still do it with distilled.
No, I directly dilute it with the lubricant, and I've had no problems at all. And
okay, perfect. Yeah. And also the injection cost. So I have actually got a vendor who's providing Intas Alpha 5 million international units per ml for 640 rupees for injection. So that's very economical. At least in Mumbai, we are getting. That's very economical. And so what you said about injecting, that do not inject through the lesion, again, that's a very important point to note, because
right, Swati, I'm sorry, we segued out and took over the conversation. Coming back to the point you were making about 5FU and MMC in OSSNs.
Yeah, so I was saying there is a comparative study between 5FU and interferon, but I just wanted to ask if there is a comparative study between mitomycin C and interferon. Is it there?
I don't think there's a head-on comparison between the two, Swati.
Okay. Because many a times, at least in not in the tertiary centers of eye centers in India, in the primary and the secondary, they still prefer, the corneal surgeons use mitomycin C, and they say it does very well in their hands. And the symptoms are like they are controllable with lubricants, so they use it depending upon the affordability only. So they give mitomycin C also as much as they prescribe interferon. So whenever they ask this question, it's really difficult to say, other than the side effect reason that mitomycin C has more side effects, to tell them that, okay, as a therapeutic effects also there is a difference between mitomycin C and interferon. Maybe Dr. Anuswa, you can take up and conduct a randomized clinical trial between mitomycin C and interferon and give us the insights. No?
Yes. So
while we are speaking, I just quickly had a look up on PubMed. There is an actual study.
There is a study.
Mitomycin C or interferon as an adjuvant therapy, but not as a primary therapy.
Primary therapy, yeah.
Yeah. So there are
recently only in October 2020, there is a paper from the Miami, Florida, Dr. Keller group, and they have compared only 5FU and interferon, but not mitomycin C and interferon.
Yeah.
So tumor resolution, whatever is there, tumor resolution rates are pretty comparable. It's only the side effect profile which is different, and for that matter, the resolution is much earlier with 5FU and MMC compared to interferon. But the side effect profile is like whatever I have used, they're very bad. The amount of blepharoconjunctivitis, red eye, the patient has irritation, very bad. And interferon, it's like nothing happens. It's completely.
Yeah.
Great. So one of the questions that Dr. Deepanjali had put up was, what is the role of ASOCT in in OSSNs, and then she of course shared the findings in one of the papers. We are of course extremely lucky to have the first author of that paper in the journal Cornea, that pioneered about the role of OSSN, of ASOCT in OSSN, and we'd be delighted to hear from the horse's mouth. So Swati, please go ahead.
Okay, Akshay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so to learn just a basic ASOCT features described, ASOCT is making a lot of buzz in terms of upcoming publications and evolution in the techniques using ultra high resolution to differentiate. So it really comes into play when you have, let's say, there is a scar or there is a nodular, you're suspecting nodular episcleritis versus OSSN, or there is a pingicula and pterygium which has little atypical features and you're not sure if this is an OSSN. So in those cases, ASOCT plays a role. Not in the definitive, you can see, keratin, like the cases which Deepanjali has shared, there's a keratinous plaque, and you can see papillomatous lesion. So in those cases, it's a clinical diagnosis and you proceed with your management plan. Only in the cases where you have a doubt whether it's any benign conjunctival or corneal pathology versus OSSN. So just to learn ASOCT features, here you can see that this is a normal epithelium, the superficial thin layer. This is a angle, so this begins the sclera. The whitish reflection is because of the scleral tissue, and this is the corneal tissue. So what's happened in OSSN is, one is there is an abrupt transition. So you can see here suddenly the epithelium has become thickened. Then there is an increase in the thickness of the epithelium. If you'll trace back this episcleral whitish tissue, so you can see that the majority of the epithelium thickened it's a supraepithelial lesion. It doesn't involve the stroma or the scleral tissue. And you can see here there's a hyporeflective area, this one area, which indicates that continuation into the Bowman's layer. So we know that this is an epithelial lesion. So there is an increase in the thickness of the epithelium. It's hyperreflective, it's more white compared to the stroma, if you'll say. And third, there is an abrupt transition. Now these features can be there in non-malignant lesions as well. So if you look at this clinical picture, you see that patient had a previous history of pterygium excision done, and you fairly see a pale, not much of vascularity in this pale lesion which has irregularity. There's a small amount of whitish specks of maybe keratin over there, but it looks like maybe there's an recurrence of the pterygium. And when you do the ASOCT, what you see is this is a hyporeflective zone. We're talking about the blackish layer, which continues into this subepithelial layer. And this is an epithelial lesion. So this scan has been taken directly through this plane. And you see that there is an increase in the thickness. There is a hyperreflective. This tissue is more white compared to this area. And there is an abrupt transition. And when we excise this lesion, which was otherwise just a small like 3 mm wide nodular lesion, and when we excite, then we see that this is a normal thickened epithelium, and this is the increase in thickness. So this had a sign of dysplasia. So ASOCT helps in such kind of a lesion to make the diagnosis that it's an OSSN or a non-OSSN lesion. And this was the publication Akshay was talking about, where we have compared the histopathology with the ASOCT features and see how accurate we were in cases of benign pathologies as well as malignancies. Now, another role ASOCT plays is in follow-up of these lesions. So this is an immunotherapy. This is a fairly 6 Klocar lesion, if you see, which has whitish keratin flakes. And when you do the ASOCT, so this is the epithelium. If you follow it, it's increased in the thickness. And this is the subepithelial lesion going like this, subepithelial layer. So this was the epithelial lesion which has increased hyperreflectivity as well as increased thickness. And this was with interferon therapy, since this was a more than 6 Klocar lesion. And this is with interferon that you see that the epithelium thickness is returning back to normal. So you can actually follow up these cases where you see this picture, there's a mild residual congestion over there and small, very flat kind of a lesion over there. But if you do the ASOCT, there's still a thickening of this much amount. And you can, if you follow this subepithelial layers going like this. So there's still a residual part of the tumor over there, for which you need to continue the interferon therapy. So in those cases also it plays a very significant role, especially in flat lesions of the flat appearance of the OSSN. Now this is the clinical picture. This has a yellowish degeneration of the limbus, and it was a 45-year-old male who was already on anti-glaucoma therapy. And if you look at this lesion, it has these feathery margins, irregular, and an advancing edge in such a big lesion. So we were thinking this is an OSSN, and we were treating with interferon. It didn't respond. And if you do the ASOCT, so what do you see here is the ASOCT is through the cornea. So this whole area is the cornea. You see an increased hyperreflectivity. So this is the epithelium. This hyperreflective zone is of Bowman's. This is the epithelium. If you compare this, this is more darker compared to this whitish appearance of the epithelium. So it's hyperreflective, but it's not much thickened. It's not coming like this. So this, in this case, ASOCT was little inconclusive since lesion was not responding to interferon. So we went ahead with excision, and this is what we found. So here you see that there's no thickening of the layer. There's only 4 layers of nuclei cells in the epithelium, and there's no dysplasia. Rather, there's a clearing of this around the large nucleus. There's a perinuclear halo, which is seen in post-viral infections. So thickening as well as hyperreflectivity and abrupt transition, these 3 features have to be there to label it as an OSSN. And sometimes you do need biopsy. ASOCT is not diagnostics. You need a histopathology to diagnose such cases. This is another example. A last slide. This was a patient who has this whitish keratinous appearance on the cornea. There's nothing on the conjunctiva. It was all clear. It's only a corneal lesion. And this much is the area of involved epithelium. So when we do the ASOCT through this area, which is very atypical for OSSN to only have isolated corneal elevated nodular appearance, having a whitish plaque overlying the epithelium. In corneal diagnosis, people have labeled it as a corneal keloid on the first appearance or Salzmann nodular degeneration. But when we did the ASOCT, so if you look at this, there is an abrupt transition. You see, this is the epithelium and this is the stromal tissue. So there is an increase in the reflectivity of the epithelium and there is an increase in the thickness of the epithelium. So this is going like this. And the stroma is pretty clear. So this cannot be a corneal keloid, which happens usually in the stroma. It would be like this if it was a keloid. So based on the OCT, we were suspicious of OSSN, but although this was a very, very unusual presentation, and this is still under review paper. And when we did the excision biopsy of membranectomy, it shows you increased thickness. There's a dysplasia, varying shape. This clearing around the nuclei you see is because of the artifact of the processing of the tissue. And this is the keratin, which is corresponding to the keratin plaques, such a huge amount of exuberant amount of keratin in this layer. So in this case, ASOCT helped us to plan and proceed with the surgical excision of this lesion, considering it as an OSSN. So ASOCT really helps out. Sorry. So ASOCT helps out in such scenarios where you're doubtful whether it's an OSSN or not an OSSN, where there's an atypical presentation, it's a flat lesion. In those cases, we should do whether you have time domain OCT, ASOCT, Visante, whether you have OptoView, any of the OCT will describe all the features which are being already published. So over to you, Akshay. That's all.
No, that's fantastic, innovative work that was done when you were a fellow, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty
that
phenomenal.
Was done when I was a fellow.
Right.
Thank you.
Dr. Gunjan, if you could, please share those slides of the last slide where she had, where Dr. Deepanjali had her list of questions. Then we can go through each of those before we wind up in the next few minutes. Or Dr. Deepanjali, if you remember those questions that we can go through, I think I should be able to pull those out.
I'll be sharing more slides.
Okay.
So one of the question was, is an anterior segment OCT a must for all cases? I think all the panelists have covered that for us. And the next question was role of ASOCT in atypical cases and masquerades. Ma'am has already discussed that. And there was a question, in which clinical scenario in current situations would you prefer an impression cytology? And any specific pearl for that, or regarding a particular situation you can think of where an impression cytology still would hold its importance?
Yeah, so impression cytology, the problem with impression cytology is that you need to have a trained ocular pathologist to be able to interpret what is normal, what is not normal. So essentially in impression cytology, we apply the Whatman filter paper strips that are with the adhesive on the sides and take each of those, and then those are transferred to slides that are stained. So a interpretation of the tissue is important. You need trained personnel. The second most important thing is the technique that it has to be, where it can be done, and the fact that a completely negative report still doesn't rule out an OSSN, which is why over time now we have all moved out completely away from impression cytology, and I haven't done any in the past 4 to 5 years. The other people on the panel can also chime in. Dr. Anusuya, what is the state at LVP? Dr. Swati?
Yes, Akshay, like as a resident at RP Center there, the standard of care I remember was impression cytology, and as you rightly said, now we have completely moved away from it. One is what you said, that a negative impression cytology does not necessarily mean that OSSN is ruled out. Second is it doesn't give us the level of involvement. It just only says whether dysplasia is there or not. Third is in cases where there is a keratotic lesion, which consists of 70 to 80% of our patients, the sampling, the imprinting is inaccurate. So because of these reasons, and the fourth one, what you said, it requires an expert pathologist to perform the procedure. So because of these four reasons, in my clinical practice, impression cytology does not have any role.
Right, thanks. Is role of ASOCT, one of the questions that we've had is, can any information be taken from on Pentacam in the absence of the availability of ASOCT, particularly using the Scheimpflug image? So basically, Pentacam is a rotating Scheimpflug camera system, and basically we use it for anterior segment analysis, where it gives us the topography and the elevation of the anterior and the posterior surfaces. So there would be some information that we would be able to obtain from that, but in terms of the abrupt transition of the epithelium, the thickness, the exact, well, we probably need more normative data and otherwise conclusive patients who have OSSN, in whom we have Pentacam images to be able to find out the features. But I think that's a great option that can be looked into later on. In medical management, the preferred drug as well as the treatment protocol, I think Dr. Anusuya and Swati have covered that in detail. And conditions where surgical management is preferred over medical management. Dr. Nupur, would you like to answer that for our audience? Any conditions? I think we can cover all of them.
So yeah, so if it's a less than 4 clock hours lesion, then I would still go in for a surgical management because it is a diagnostic and a therapeutic treatment. So that would be my, rather than going for a interferon, I would probably directly go in for a surgical excision. That would be my. Any difference of opinion, Akshay?
No, I think it's apart from just, while you said, and I think part of it was covered by Dr. Anusuya, about a small localized 4 clock hour lesion with very little or no corneal extension, and primarily a limbal nodule. These are also amenable to immunotherapy. So a couple of other soft factors that also play a role is issue of How is the patient going to be able to store interferon if prescribed? Is the patient going to follow up? The age of the patient, mobility of the patient. So all of those also, I think, play a role in our practice. So if I know that, in a single attempt, we are going to be able to make the patient tumor free and the lesion is amenable to surgery, I tend to do that more. Whereas we have younger patients, more compliant patients, who we can wait and watch and know that, they would be a little more compliant. Then those are patients, or of course, any of those involving larger areas and not amenable to surgery. Obviously, I'll prefer medical management. Dr. Swati and Anusuya, before we close, any more thoughts?
So one more thing I will just like to add to this, whatever you said, I completely agree to that. And apart from that, whenever we suspect intraocular extension or maybe an orbital extension, and when do we do that? Intraocular extension is we will have to test for scleral fixity. We instill a drop of paracaine and just move the conjunctiva beside it with the help of a cotton bud. And if we feel OSSN is typically an epithelial lesion, as we have already understood, so whenever there is a scleral fixity or an intraocular or a scleral extension, then the lesion won't move. So that is known as scleral fixity. Or if we see a deep corneal involvement, or we see AC cells, or objectively, if we can demonstrate it with the help of an ultrasound biomicroscope. So whenever there is an intraocular extension, obviously interferon is out of the window. We will have to consider surgical option like extended enucleation. Second is in cases of orbital extension, and when do we suspect that? When we can't see the posterior extent of the lesion, or in the fornices, the lesion is going into the fornices, we can't see, we will have to go ahead with an orbital imaging, rule out orbital extension. And when orbital extension is there, again, interferon is out of question. We will have to consider other options like an orbital exenteration.
Right. And I think last question is that if you have removed the entire tumor clinically, what is your protocol for management considering surgical excision? So I think the panelist, Dr. Swati, do you want to answer that? What post surgery, what decides your protocol, and in what scenarios do you manage it, in which way?
So, okay, I'm unmuted. So post-surgical excision, you will just give topical steroid and antibiotic combination in a tapering dose, and you'll inquire about the pathologist report. So if margin and base are free, nothing to be done. Just keep patient on a regular follow-up 3 monthly for first year, and then you can keep on 6 monthly if they are no high risk. So steroid to prefer is, it depends. If it's a very small lesion of exercise, I can give just combination of low dose, low potent steroids like Lotepred with antibiotic, or we can give combined with Predfort and antibiotic. So because you're going to put AMG
Unfortunately,
over
we
there,
don't have
so
a pharma sponsor, so we can't take their name. But yeah, please go ahead.
No, I would say for a corneal surgeon, anything you do for your pterygium surgery, post-pterygium excision, the way you treat your patients, it's exactly the same, because you remove it and you put a membrane over there. If the margins come positive or if the base comes positive, then your treatment protocol differs. As Dr. Anusa mentioned, if base is positive, you'll do plaque brachytherapy. If margins are positive but base is negative, then you give interferon therapy for 3 months and then just keep on a close follow-up.
Right. So I used to, given that the availability of plaque is an issue, so some of us try to circumvent it by doing double freeze throat cryotherapy to the base in cases where we know that, okay, there is no gross involvement intraoperatively, there is no scleral fixity. So even if there is a full thickness involvement of the tumor, then you just do that. But I think even though that's off protocol, that tends to work sometimes. But of course, intraoperatively, if there is scleral fixity and you have to even do lamellar sclerectomy, those are straightforward cases that require plaque brachytherapy. Yeah. So I think we've covered almost everything. One important one question that Dr. Deepanjali has given us is, what is the role of UBM in any particular scenario of OSSN? Dr. Anusuya or Dr. Swati?
Dr. Anusuya?
Yeah, so UBM, as I said, whenever we have the clinical indicators of intraocular extension, we can confirm that with the help of ultrasound biomicroscopy, more so in cases like nodulo-ulcerative OSSN or mucoepidermoid OSSNs, which are known to be more aggressive.
Right.
So ruling out intraocular extension is a must, because the treatment protocol will completely vary.
So basically, to summarize, ASOCT now has completely eliminated your role of UBM. UBM in any case gives us only a certain amount of reasonable resolution of the angle structures. It really doesn't give us a very, very granular visibility of what is the depth of involvement of the sclera, etc. So because OCT is able to give us that, it is ruled out. So only intraocular involvement is probably the only indication now for knowing the extent of involvement, because UBM doesn't help us in diagnosing OSSN. I think we've covered everything, and we are 15 minutes over time. So, Dr. Gunjan, do we have any more questions, or can we wrap it up? And I'd like to thank all our panelists, Dr. Anushya, Dr. Nupur, and Dr. Swati, but above all, Dr. Deepanjali, for sharing such a brilliant case that brought out all these points that we could discuss. And Dr. Gunjan will let us know about the next episode of Surfing.
So we are inviting for the next session, we are inviting cases. So you can share interesting case or any video with us on the mail ID gocgrandround@gmail.com.